whether you're the mom or the dad, child custody is all about building a parent-child relationship, right? Because the courts know that. They know that it's vital that these kids build a relationship with their parents. If you don't build a relationship with them early, when they're young, when they're teenagers, you won't have the deposits in their emotional bank account that you need to discipline them and restrain them and keep them from all manner of evil.
There's a book on, not on children, but on husband and wife relationships, I think, that talk about, is it Gary Chapman? I can't remember. One of the books that talks about how, you have this love bank, and sometimes you're depositing in the love bank, and sometimes you're making withdrawals from the love bank because the other person has to tolerate you, right? And if you don't have enough deposits, then you get overdrawn. And I think that's very indicative of children, because if you don't form that relationship with them when they're young, and like you said, make those deposits into the love bank, what happens as a teenager is you get overdrawn, and you don't have the relationship to be able to, intervene and discipline and do all the things that you need to be able to do when they're teenagers.
Right, yeah, they're going to rebel, they're going to defy you, and if you don't have the relationship, if you haven't dug any holes in the sand, you're behind the eight ball on that. People tend to make this too complicated, right? That's the whole idea behind the metaphor. It's like digging a hole in the sand with your bare hands, and I'm telling you, the kids laugh, and they scream with joy, and the waves come in and they wash over them, and they giggle and they laugh. And when you're doing this, you're on your hands and knees, because I'm not suggesting that you make them dig holes in the sand.
Right.
What you do, the way you do this is, the kids are running around on the beach, and you sit down and start digging a hole in the sand.
Right.
And they come over. What's he doing?
Yeah.
And you dig, and the kids help you dig, and you create dams and sandcastles. And
you can just be digging for no reason. That's how kids are. They're just like, okay, we'll help you dig a hole to China. That's fine, right?
Yeah, and they're utterly uninterested in anything else that's going on at the beach.
Yeah.
They're not. They don't want to surf. They don't want to play in the water, but they love to dig holes. And the idea is, it's a metaphor for getting your hands dirty, for getting on your hands and knees.
And that's essentially what the therapist taught us to do, is just sit and describe the child's play back to them, as opposed to trying to influence it or manipulate it, or right, because and we've talked about this in previous episodes, but young children in particular tend to parallel play. So even if you put 2 5-year-olds next to each other in a room, they won't usually, if it's 2 boys and you give them Hot Wheels to play with, they'll usually play with their Hot Wheels side by side. They don't usually do a lot of crossover interaction. You won't see crashes or races or different things like that at that age. Usually when you cross over into 10, you start seeing that stuff. But in the beginning, they will usually parallel play.
And then when they turn 16, you see a lot of crashes and races.
So when we did an episode a few episodes ago on parallel parenting, but that's where this parent-child interaction therapy, or PCIT, that we were trained in comes from. And it's the idea of allowing your child to have that individual play that's directed by them, and all you're doing is saying, oh, I see you have this, or I see you're doing that.
The other day, my 15-year-old was skateboarding in the street, and I was late for Tammy's support group. Actually, we were trying to get out of the house, and Isaac was saying, "Hey, Dad, watch this! I can do a kickflip, ollie,
blah 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 on his skateboard."
I had to say, yeah,
for all you people that have girls and don't know what that is.
So, Isaac, we have to leave, or we won't get to the group on time, and so you can show me that later. But especially little kids, it's like, look at me, Dad. Watch me, Dad.
Yeah.
And they're hungry in a sense.
Yeah.
For affirmation from their parents.
Yeah. And I do think that's true even as a teenager. They're just not as good a lot of times as teenagers, depending on their personality, about asking for attention. That child in particular has no problem asking for the attention, but
he asks for a lot of attention.
Yeah, he does, in all kinds of forms: time, energy, money, driving in places, all kinds of stuff. People get very focused on the other parent, and they see the other parent as the obstacle to them getting more parenting time, but that's not the real obstacle. The real obstacle is your relationship with the child.
Right.
And when you go through a divorce and you have minor kids, those children become the core of the divorce process. I mean, unless they're maybe 17 and a half or, something like that where you're kind of on the cusp of it not being an issue. But for most people, if you have minor children, that's going to become the core issue. And what everybody wants to do is sling mud at the other parent or cut them down to make themselves look better.
Right.
And here's
that's true.
That's our instinct, and it just was. It just is. It was mine at the time, and that's just how our normal human thought process goes. But the other parent, even if you prove the other parent being a bad parent or whatever you term a bad parent, the court's bar is very low. They only require adequate parents. So you may not like what the other parent does. You might not agree with it, but the bar is still very low. And, even I always say to people, even if they're a bad parent and you establish that in the court, that doesn't necessarily make you a good parent. Right. It's two different things. And they tend to think that they're like weighting the scales, but really what the court's looking for is each of them individually, where are they at on that scale. It's not a balanced scale where more for the other person is less for you and vice versa, which is how we tend to think about it.
I'm bonded with those kids.
Right.
They're angry, surly teenagers, and they mouth off and they talk back and they do the things that teenagers do.
It's true.
But at the end, I know I have authority over them, and the older one is looking more and more like a man each day,
and sounding like one too.
And you get to a point where they're this great big man, and you can't physically force them to do anything.
It's weird, yeah.
But I have authority. Like if I get cross with him, he will get to the point occasionally where he says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that."
Yeah.
And to me, that's a huge victory.
Yeah.
But that was years in the making. That started when they were just 2.
Right. So remember, the relationship is king. So please dig holes in the sand with your kids.
Right. Don't put it off.